Hello, my dear gardening friends. It can be quite frustrating to spend so much time and effort and money to keep our gardens looking beautiful, and as a result our gardens look just average. So in this video we are going to focus on how to manage our maintenance of our gardens, the way that this maintenance is not overwhelming for us, how to make sure that our gardens look at their healthiest and their best performance, and how not to spend the fortune to run the gardens. And the first thing I want to talk with you about would be that landscape should be balanced. And what do I mean by the balanced landscape? Of course, a lot of us have this small amount of lands around our houses, and we can't afford to look at nature and big fields where nature manages everything among forests and meadows, and do the same in our gardens. But we can try to make those small lots which we are in charge of, make them more balanced. And what I mean is, we work with nature. We don't work against nature. And the big thing is that a lot of nurseries where we live, they offer different plants, and some of them are exotic, some of them are not native. And we go to the nurseries, we get tempted, we buy this plant, we bring it into our house, we plant it. And the plant requires so much more than nature in our area can give it. For example, we bring what happened to me several years ago. My soil is not acidic enough to support blueberries, but of course I want to have this little blueberry patch in my garden. And I bought 3 blueberry bushes. I planted them in the garden, and of course blueberry bushes are not doing well. I started to do research. Research showed me that blueberries love acidic soil, and of course I started to make soil more acidic. I was starting to put more stuff into the soil to change the composition of soil, and still my blueberries were not doing very well. They produced a crop here and there, but I thought about it and I said to myself, how many years I'm going to force my soil to behave in a different way in order to support the blueberries in my backyard? So I gave up that idea. I gave blueberries away, and since then blueberries are not growing in my neutral soil. Blueberries like acidic soil. So when you go to the nurseries and you see these wonderful exotic things, think twice, because plants which are growing in our area, which are adjusted to the climate where we live, they are so much more equipped to withstand drought conditions, to withstand sun pressure, to withstand wind, and whatever is happening in the area where you live. For example, here right now we are having a very strong drought, I would say drought. Rains are not here a lot, and I can see in my garden which plants are doing just fine, no problem, they are standing to the drought all right, and which plants are suffering. For example, when we went on vacation, for 1 week we had no rain whatsoever. We came back, garden was really stressed out, without water. My butterfly bush was not even thinking to become drought stressed. My roses were okay also, and again, a lot of people think that roses are prima donnas of the garden, but latest introductions from our wonderful rose hybridizers are fairly good for drought tolerance and the absence of water. So my roses were doing very well, but some plants, especially plants in pots, well, somebody was watering my pots, but still some plants did suffer, and they didn't like those drought conditions. So the point is, we have to work with nature. We don't want to spend energy and time and money to adjust the environment to fit our beautiful thing which we brought from the nursery. And just imagine if all the plants in your garden are fairly I wouldn't say local, but fairly well adjusted to the area where you live. they will be able to withstand hard conditions so much better, and they will look wonderful. They wouldn't be suffering from drought or shade or sun, and as a result you wouldn't spend so much money, energy and effort to keep those plants just average. Very often when I walk through the meadows and forests and I think how nature takes care after its trees and shrubs and grasses and soils through the years, I'm amazed how smoothly everything goes. And of course, you might think, well, nature's performing just fine without any fertilizers, without any additional work. I understand that, yes, that's true, but you know what? We have 3 maple trees in front of our house, and those maple trees always drop twigs and debris and leaves on our front yard. And if I would be managing my backyard or my garden as Mother Nature, of course I would not pick up any debris falling down on the soil. That debris will accumulate, start decomposing, protect the soil from wind, from winter frost, from damage, from snow, and eventually all those twigs and leaves will create my garden horrible looking, but they would be excellent for the soil. Every year the debris will decompose, will protect the soil, will feed the soil, and soil will have all the nutrients needed to create beautiful gardens. But of course, we want our gardens looking neat, pretty, and we do extra job. We do this extra circle to do the same what nature does, but in a different way. In my garden, of course, I collect all the debris, I compost them, and then next year I return all the compost back to the soil. I don't want all that stuff to compost on my, on my front lawn. So in a way we can do that instead of nature, the way nature takes care after the land. We can do the same with the help of composting. And why do we want to do that? Because we want to make sure that our soil is the healthiest it can be. And a lot of gardeners, believe it or not, overlook that point. They think, okay, as long as I take care after the plants, soil is fine, whatever soil I have, it's just soil. They put a lot of artificial fertilizers in it, and then they are surprised that nothing is performing very well. I highly encourage you to invest a lot into the life of the soil. There has to be a soil management on your lot. And by that I mean, if it would be up to me, and that's what I'm doing in my garden, no artificial fertilizers, because eventually they take the life of the soil away. The microorganisms on the soil eventually decrease when we use artificial fertilizers, and the soil is becoming less fertile, producing less beautiful and healthy plants, and then you are the micromanager of your garden, guarding from all the diseases and bugs, invasions and whatnot. And that doesn't create maintenance, ease of maintenance in our gardens. So the life of soil is very important. And how to take care after the life of soil? I highly encourage you to do the composting in your garden. And if you see how much we throw in those green, brown compost bags on our curbs, how much stuff we throw outside, it's almost like a crime. I see it, because there's so much goodness can go back to our soil, nourish it, and make our gardens so much healthier. So for those who do not compost, I would encourage to do that. And by the way, here's a video how I do it. And I return that compost back to my soil twice a year, in spring and in fall. So I do the job which nature does so very well in the forest and meadows. All the debris are falling down. They create the layer of natural stuff which is slowly decomposes and feeds the soil, nourishes the soil and protects it. Another important topic I wanted to touch in this video would be that some plants, by their nature, are more expensive to introduce in the garden and they require more maintenance. And I mean annuals and perennials. So if you go into the nursery and you have this, and you see this beautiful perennial plant, just know that by default you would need to spend more time with it in the garden. Of course, annuals, we introduce them every year in spring into our gardens. We need to pay money for them. Unless you raise them from seeds, then we will have bigger quantities of annuals. But again, it's time consuming. You need to prepare the site, you need to plant them. In the fall, you need to take them out, and next year you need to start all over again. Some annuals need deadheading, they need fertilization, they need a lot of sun. So all this stuff, what I mean is you can't plant annuals and forget about them. Although there are some plants which are bearing their dead very well, meaning that they shed their flowers very well and you don't see them, they don't require a lot of water and they flourish on the sun. But generally, the maintenance of annuals and perennials is higher than shrubs and trees in our gardens. And if you want your garden to be not as maintenance involved, I would advise you to look into shrubs, subshrubs, which are native to your area, which can withstand all the hard conditions and look their best. I must say that my garden is not maintenance easy. I have a lot of perennials. I do have David Austin roses, which are a focal point, I would say, of my garden. And this spring I introduced even more of David Austin roses. So I understand that, and I agree to make sure that I am running my garden well, and I agree to spend time in my garden. But for you who want your garden to look best, the best advice I would give you is to invest into plants which are native and plants which are shrubs. If you're at the time where you are just starting to design your garden and you're choosing what type of garden you want, I want you to keep in mind that some garden styles are more time-consuming to maintain than others. For example, country style, cottage style gardens, where plants self-reseed and grow wherever they want, can be less maintenance involved. My garden is, I would say, it's on a higher maintenance. I do run a lot of stiff shapes in my garden, and they do require regular trimming to keep them under control and to keep them well shaped. So my garden tends to go towards maybe English garden, and I do run a lot of annuals, perennials, not many annuals, perennials and roses in my garden, and that makes my garden somewhat high on the maintenance level. But if you don't want that, you don't want maintenance, you can run your garden as a carefree country cottage garden where plants self-reseed and happily coexist with each other. We do love our lawns, and it's a great place for our family to relax, for our kids to play. It also is very easy to install and very expensive to maintain. Through the year, through the growing season, we probably need to mow our lawn at least 20 times. We need to fertilize our lawn, and we cannot go by without fertilization of the lawn, because our lawn is monoculture. And what I mean is we have thousands of plants, thousands of grass blades growing together, and they put a stress on our soil because they require the same nutrients, the same conditions from the soil, and they deplete soil soil availability of nutrients and whatnot. So we do need to fertilize our lawns. We do need to mow the lawn to keep them nice and lush for our kids and our family to enjoy. And the diversity is not there. And by diversity, I mean that diversity in our garden is very healthy, because diverse plants in the garden attract different beneficial insects. They put different requirements on our soil. Some plants return nutrients to the soil. For example, this year I stopped worrying about clover invading my grass. I generally didn't worry about weeds in my grass area, but this year I let clover invade my grass, and honestly I love it. As long as I mow on high level, and I mow very often, not to let clover go high with its leaves, clover is performing very well. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, clover fixes nitrogen back into the soil. So it's from now on, I'm going to let clover invade my grass and live on my lawn happily. The only negative feedback about clover is that once it starts to produce flowers, those white balls, bees are after those flowers. They are great pollinators, and my kids complain that they don't want to go on the grass because there are bees. But the way out of it, to mow regularly on high setting with a mower and cut all those flowers off. This way bees are not here to hunt for flowers, and your kids can run around with no problems. Another thing, so minimizing lawns, if you can, would be a great reducer of maintenance in the garden. Also, the way we take care after the border between our grass and our flower bed. You see here I installed this brick border, which is serving here very well. It's these are old bricks which I found, and I just put them in myself. This way, when I do the mowing, I don't need to do the edging every time I mow. I can do edging every third or fourth time. I just run my mower on the bricks, take care after all the edges, and this transition from grass to flower bed is reducing the maintenance, that we don't have to take care after that sharp division between grass and soil in our flower bed. Another thing what we can do the ground covers. And ground covers are excellent, especially the natural ones. What they do, they protect the soil from strong temperatures, especially in winter. They condition the soil, they slowly decompose and they nourish the soil. They make sure that soil is not dry, so the presence of worms and microorganisms are there. So, and also another big thing is that mulches and whatever ground covers you can use, the mulch doesn't allow weeds to germinate. And that's a great thing, because weeds are probably the number one maintenance headache in our gardens, right? So if you use mulches under the trees, under the shrubs, in your flower beds, under my roses, I use mulches in my garden too. That's another great way to reduce maintenance in the garden. Of course, you have to renew it every year or almost every year, depending on the level of mulch you put in and on type of ground cover you put in. I would highly advise you to use natural ground covers. I use the combination of compost and I use mulch. So if I don't have a lot of compost, I put a little layer of compost, and on top I put a layer of mulch. This way weeds don't have time and any chance to germinate under those two layers. But even if they do, it's a fairly easy maintenance to pick them up here and there and be done. Just look at my gorgeous butterfly bush. I let it spread its wings and take the area it wants in my garden. And as a result, my butterfly bush is very happy. In this segment of my video, I want to talk about the size of plants, the mature size of plants versus the size of plants which we bring from the nursery. So very often when I travel and I look around at the dwellings of people, I see these wonderful little spaces, especially around the entrances into the houses, where we have dwarf Alberta spruces planted, let's say. Excuse me. And they look so cute when they come back from the nursery. They're small, they're cute, they're well shaped, and of course people have a tendency, people put them right there near the steps, expecting that little guy to behave like that for many years. Well, guess what? Plants do grow. Some of them grow faster than others, some of them grow very slow, but still, after several years, inevitably that dwarf Alberta spruce will outgrow that space, will start coming into the passageway, into the steps. And here what do people do? They take cutters, they take secateurs, and they start cutting that plant to fit the shape, the space they're in. What a big mistake. And people do it over and over and over. I understand the temptation to do that because you want your landscape to look very well right now. You don't want to wait 3, 4, 5 years for that bush to grow into the space. But I would highly advise you to consider the mature size of plants when you bring them into your garden. For example, look at this butterfly bush. I do trim it once a year, but not because of controlling of size, because the butterfly bush has a tendency to flop. And look, I let it take the space and flourish here on the sun, attracting bugs, butterflies, and whatnot. So if you would go into the nursery and if you look at butterfly bushes, they come in these cute little wonderful pots. And when you look at this bush, you see how much space it takes in the garden. It's a big presence. So always consider the size of mature plants when they come into your garden. I understand it's difficult to wait for that plant to come into its full shape, but then year after year, the joy of absence of maintenance would be so great. Your garden would be performing well. Your plants would be looking at their best, their majestical best, because they can develop their mature, wonderful shape. You don't need to spend hours trying to trim them and fit them into the shape, into the space where they're in. And as a result, those plants are not looking their best. Because I think natural form of plants is the most attractive one. When we let plants go and grow and take space and enjoy sun, then maintenance is up to a minimum. For example, this butterfly bush, the most what I do to it, I just trim it once in spring. I make sure I fertilize it in spring with compost, and that's it. That's all what I do to butterfly bush. Some people deadhead these spent stalks. I don't even do that because I just let this bush behave the way it wants. And the maintenance here is zero. So I hope you were able to learn something about the maintenance of the gardens in this video. Please do subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm creating for you. Happy gardening, and I will see you next time.